Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for the kind words. If you were wondering on the backside what's in this box, they are chocolates. Now, let's move on, and I'm very glad to give floor now to my good friend, Amb.Sorin Ducaru, who is the Assistant Secretary General of Emerging Security Challenges at NATO HQ, which I would say, Sorin, is a bit odd because cyber has so far, as I can see, emerged some time ago as a security challenge. Maybe it should be renamed, but he's really I would say, the embodiment of NATO's cyber defense policy and constantly nudging the alliance and nations forward in that respect. Sorin, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Indeed, it's great to be back to Tallinn on this stage that always rocks. And it's an honor, Madam President, distinguished Director Sakov, and my dear friend Sven, to be here and acknowledge the great work that NATO does with the Center of Excellence in pushing the cyber agenda forward. And frankly, we're very thankful to Estonia as such for being such an e-driver in not just in NATO, but also in the European Union. I will start with the obvious, maybe with a bit more sporty approach, stating that we are riding the high and faster waves of a continuous technological revolution that brought us from the industrial age to the information age. And we're trying to conceptualize it through concepts like digital domain, cyberspace, without fully feeling it, touching it, or even grasping it. It's a bit like the great song that inspired me and made me think about the dynamics of the bits of the bytes in cyberspace, where we don't grasp them, but it's beautiful. And even more so, more important, it's vital. It's kind of like the atmosphere for our life. And link it to the theme, the core theme of this year's CyCon. I would argue that the digital domain, the cyberspace, is at the core of our way of life as we know it, of our societies, economies, and we'd rather protect it and defend it, and actually bring it at the core of our defenses. Coming from a defense organization, I can tell you, I can vouch that we are actually facing the greatest security challenges in a generation, and frankly, cyber is on the top of these challenges. It's not alone. There are other conventional and non-conventional challenges, but all together they generate a hybrid mix that obliges us to think different and to raise our game. We see increasing intensity, frequency, sophistication, and damaging effect of cyber attacks against our critical infrastructure, against democratic processes. We see links with different crises or hybrid conflicts. And we also see links with military operations. And this is why we are in the business of, frankly, raising our game in cyber defense. And this is what NATO has been doing for a number of years now. Now, I warn you, my slides are heavy, and it's a trick here because you can look at them home, but if they're heavy enough, they are a colorful background, and they still keep the focus on the presentation, my presentation. What I wanted to put up here on screen is a kind of representation of milestones in the evolution of NATO's approach on cyber defense. And there are first and foremost, two eras to see. One is what I would call the technical era that started in 2002 at the Prague summit, where there was a recognition of need to really address the emerging challenges against the systems, IT systems that NATO was operating. But then there was a point that moved us to the era of policy approach. And this was actually generated by the attacks in 2007 against Estonia that generated some very heated debates in NATO and actually provided the push to address cyber, to bring cyber closer to NATO's core business. But it wasn't so fast and it wasn't so immediate, because we have been upgrading NATO policy already 3 times. The first one at the Bucharest summit in 2008 laid the foundations, the principles, and the vision of labor, the responsibility of NATO to focus on its own networks and that of allies to defend national networks. It was pretty much inward focused. It established organizational framework structures, first Cyber Defense Management Authority, later Cyber Defense Management Board. But it was just the foundation. In the meantime, towards the summer of 2008, we witnessed the use of cyber in the context of the war in Georgia. And then, while NATO was preparing for the Lisbon summit, facing the 21st century security challenges, we realized that we need an upgrade. And that upgrade was focusing on not just on NATO's own networks through deciding the centralized protection of NATO's networks over a number of more than 50 sites at that time, but also the need to establish some benchmarks for allies. And it was for the first time that we decided to introduce cyber defense capability targets in the NATO defense planning process. We went further, and the next milestone was the Wales summit in 2014. This took place against the background of the illegal annexation of Crimea and the hybrid action in the context of the events in and around Ukraine, including significant cyber attacks, and frankly also against the first, I would say, quite visible attack against NATO in March 2014, where for about 10 hours the NATO headquarters website and the unclassified business network were disrupted due to a distributed denial of service attack assumed publicly by Cyber Berkut. So it was in this context that at the Wales summit, NATO produced what I would call a change of paradigm, linking cyber defense to its reason of being, to its core task of collective defense, but also to the other key task of cooperative security and crisis management. It recognized the applicability of international law in cyberspace, and also developed a framework of assistance to allies in the case of cyber attacks. And another aspect, it opened towards the outside world by generating strong mandates of partnership with partner nations, international organizations, with industry and academia. Now, I want you to take 3 key conclusions out of this evolution. Number 1, this evolution has been generated by and pushed by the development of the threat landscape. Number 2, NATO has diversified its approach from being only inward focused in the beginning and opening up towards addressing it in concert with allies, but also opening up to the rest of the world. And number 3, the pace of evolution has been accelerated. I would highlight that it's less than 10 years since NATO addressed cyber defense as a policy issue and not just an IT related issue. It's less than 3 years since NATO has linked cyber defense to its core business of collective defense. And it's less than 1 year since at the Warsaw Summit, NATO linked or recognized cyberspace as an operational domain. And I think you can see this fast pace of evolution. I will speak a bit more about the decision at Warsaw because they influence our way ahead. Being the political process manager in NATO on these issues, let me tell you a few things also about the politics behind this and what were the key factors that determined the policy and helped us leap forward. Number one, the real recognition of the magnitude and dynamics of the cyber challenge. Number two, what I would call bridging of the cyber learning, cyber education, cyber cognitive gap at the strategic level. For somebody who started his career as a geek, but then in computer science, and then shift to political science with the changes in my own country, I have to tell you that this aspect of bridging some technical knowledge with the necessity to generate decisions at the policy and strategic level has been an important aspect of NATO's evolution. And while the North Atlantic Council were probably addressing cyber issues maybe once in a year, now it's one of the top subjects of the agenda. But the third element that I wanted to highlight in this political dynamics is what I would call, it's not defined as this, but this is how I like to see it, the grand cyber bargain within NATO, which refers to the sharing of responsibilities. NATO first on its own networks, allies, national responsibilities, also the balance between Article 5, Article 3 in the Washington Treaty, and the fact that collective cyber defense could also evolve in terms of development and assuming it, as long as there was a clear recognition that allies are delivering on their own responsibilities to defend their own networks. And two more aspects. The next one is the continuation of the focus of the NATO approach towards prevention, protection, resilience, and the defensive mandate, which is actually the core business of NATO, also with applicability in cyberspace, and the link, the adherence to international law. Last but not least, a key element in the political dynamics was the understanding that it needs to be open to the rest of the world. This is how it's a kind of representation of our centralized protection. It covers over 50 different locations at this time, more than 100,000 systems with about 10 levels of security, and it has a number of functions from intrusion prevention to computer forensics, vulnerability assessment, and actually the use of rapid reaction teams in case of significant disruptions or attack, and the creation and functioning of the cyber threat assessment cell, which brings the assessments of cyber threat at strategic level. We are operating today under a couple of key decisions from Warsaw. One is the Cyber Defense Pledge. It's interesting why this pledge has been assumed by heads of state at this high level at the last summit. The objective was threefold, I would say. Number one, to really create a vehicle so that it's on the top of the attention of strategic decision makers. Number two, to prioritize investment in cyber. And number three, to also create a vehicle that would establish some, I would say, driving forces beyond the pure NATO network, NATO mandate to focus on military or strategic governmental networks, but reaching out to aspects that have to do with the security of critical infrastructure and other aspects that are not exactly at the core of NATO's mandate, but upon NATO depends to fulfill its operations and mission. And what it has achieved after the first baseline report was, number one, indeed, a prioritization of resources and focus of strategic attention, but also something that we have not anticipated, a push for interagency or intergovernment, the cooperation between intergovernment agency in each nation, and frankly, more high-level experience sharing among allies that had the role of, I would say, closing many of the uneven approaches in terms of cyber defense at the level of different allied nations. So the conclusion is that in all allied nations there are mature policies, organizational structures, also focus on capabilities and skills, but the conclusion also points to the need of extra significant engagement with extra focus on exchanging information, boosting training, education, exercises, but also the necessity of promoting some of the basics in a more harmonious way, cyber hygiene and capability development in partnership with industry and also with academia. The second big decision in Warsaw was that of declaring cyberspace, recognizing cyberspace as a domain in operations in which NATO has to defend itself as effectively as in air, land, and sea. What this means, first and foremost, it means a shift of mindset, of planning, and also exercising from what we called an information assurance approach, focused on assuring that there is integrity over the systems and information upon it, to a mission assurance approach, recognizing that we're going to operate in a heavily contested environment where we cannot count on full information assurance, so the mindset, the whole planning, the training should evolve with a mission assurance focus. Let me also mention that addressing cyberspace as a domain in operation is not code name for NATO of going offensive. It doesn't change the mandate of NATO. NATO as an organization will not develop or not possess and doesn't possess today any offensive cyber capabilities, and we are not providing any capability targets for nations to develop in this sense. Voluntary contributions from allied nations can be only contemplated when if they really are linked to provide effects to the benefit of the alliance in a context where it's strongly linked with a defensive mandate and with the applicability of international law. This in itself will generate a lot of future work along a roadmap to implement cyber as an operational domain. The third big focus of the last summit was that of strengthening of partnerships. Now, in terms of partnership with partner nations, NATO has a case-by-case approach. It's not a one-size-fits-all. The rule is that it develops based on mutual interest and trust, and we have a number of great partnerships that have been developed. What I would highlight even more is the partnership with international organizations, namely the European Union, with which NATO has signed, NATO's Computer Incident Response Center has signed a technical arrangement of cooperation in cyber domain with CERT-EU. And after the joint NATO-EU declaration at the Warsaw Summit there are a number of 4 key domains where we are advancing our cooperation with the European Union. The other key aspect is that NATO is strongly in support of the development of norms and of responsible state behavior in cyberspace that are pushed forward by the governmental group of experts in the UN framework, or the confidence building measures in cyberspace at the level of OEC, without being in the lead, but actually understanding that these have a key role in terms of prevention, and we would definitely rather prevent major war or confrontation in cyberspace than actually fight it. Last but not least, partnership with industry has been key, and frankly, the situational awareness on both industry side and the NATO side has increased significantly, and it was tested during the recent attacks, including the WannaCry. We are participating in a number of exercises, but there's one cyber coalition which is always organized here in Estonia, where NATO participates along with its partners, EU, partner nations and industry, and actually every year the scenarios are getting more complex and more linked to the real world, to the reality. Now, to close my remarks, let me say a couple of words on the way ahead. Will be a lot of continuous focus on how to strengthen NATO's own protection of systems. And we will have an expansion of the centralized protections because there are always new of the loose ends, I would say, that will come under this umbrella. Also include the latest technologies like cyber analytics, forensics, and so on and so forth. And the implementation of the cyber domain roadmap will be discussed, I know, a bit later in a panel today, but will be at the heart of this transformation within the approach in the alliance. Secondly, we are going to increase the push from NATO towards allies to strengthen national cyber defenses by introducing a new generation of cyber defense capability targets, very much focused on updates of policies, strategies, and national level capabilities, including those related to deployable networks in operations. Third, we're focusing on more and more on information and intelligence exchange, and the creation of the intelligence division last year will significantly help linking what I would call technical analysis from our systems, and also from what we see in cooperation with industry with the strategic analysis. And last but not least, there's going to be a strong push to strengthen the partnerships. When it comes to where I see the challenges, number one, it's one of the aspects that has to do with the dynamics of the technology and the threat landscape. The challenge of being fast enough and keeping up with the trends of IoT, artificial intelligence, that will be completely changing the game in a very near future. So there's a challenge of speedy adaptation. Number two, a challenge of not being stovepiped and actually linking cyber challenges with what happens in the information warfare domain and the other domains. Number three, I would say the need to be more political engaged and generate responses to cyber attacks. And President Kaljulaid mentioned the need to establish some red lines and then act affirmatively upon them. And frankly, act affirmatively upon the norms and confidence building measures that have been voluntary, it's true, adopted by NATO. And last, I think we need to continuously work on our mindset. We kind of address defense too much in conventional, and let me call it metaphorically, analogical concepts, while the threat landscape or the attack surface is increasingly digital. So we need to push this conceptual evolution forward. Thank you very much.